The ink on the marriage contract was barely dry when Dominic handed her the pen. It was a sterile, calculated business transaction. 6 months, $1 million, and her father's life spared. He bought her obedience, but he never calculated the cost of her heart or the day he'd beg for it. The high-rise office smelled of ozone expensive leather and old copper. Tessa sat perfectly still in the center of the sprawling room, her hands folded over her lap. Her knuckles were white. She didn't look at the sprawling view of the Chicago skyline, pressing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked at the blood on the Persian rug. It belonged to her father. Paul sat slumped in a straight-backed wooden chair in the corner. His breathing was wet and ragged. His left eye was swollen shut, the skin around it, a mottled, ugly purple. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, their faces as blank as concrete walls. Tessa had stopped crying an hour ago. Crying was a luxury for people who had a way out. As an ER nurse, she knew the difference between a superficial wound and a fatal one. Her father was bleeding out slowly from a dozen different bad choices. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Dominic Russo walked in. He didn't slam the door. He didn't strut. He moved with the quiet, efficient economy of a man who owned the air he walked through. He wore a dark charcoal suit, devoid of a tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He had dark hair, clipped short, and eyes the color of old pavement. He didn't look at Paul. He looked straight at Tessa. "Miss Sullivan," Dominic said. His voice was a low rasp, like tires on gravel. "Mr. Russo." Her voice shook just a fraction, but she locked her jaw. Dominic walked to his desk and leaned against the edge, crossing his ankles. He pulled a thick manila folder from the polished surface and tossed it onto the glass coffee table in front of her. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Your father owes me $2.4 million, Dominic said. He stated it like a weather report. No malice. Just a fact. He borrowed from my lieutenants to cover his debts with the sports books. Then he borrowed from the sports books to cover his debts to my lieutenants. A textbook spiral. He has no assets. His house is mortgaged to the studs. His life insurance policy lapsed 3 months ago." Tessa swallowed the dry lump in her throat. "I know. Do you?" Dominic tilted his head. "Because standard procedure for a debt this size with no collateral involves a trip to an industrial incinerator down by the docks. It's clean. It's efficient." A pathetic whimper slipped from her father's busted lips. Tessa didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Dominic. "You didn't bring me here to watch him die. If you wanted him dead, he'd be ash already. You brought me here because you want something." A muscle feathered in Dominic's jaw. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features before settling back into a flat mask. "You're smarter than he is. That's good. I need someone smart." He uncrossed his ankles and walked around the table, stopping just inches from her knees. "My uncle died last week. The family is restructuring. The old guard is nervous. They think I'm too young, too volatile. They want a family man at the head of the table, a man with a wife, a man with roots." Tessa stared at the crisp crease in his trousers. "You want me to lie for you?" "I want you to marry me," Dominic corrected. The silence in the room became absolute. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to roar. Tessa finally looked up, meeting his dead pavement eyes. She searched for a joke, a punchline. There was none. "You want a fake marriage. I want a legal marriage," Dominic said, his tone flat. "A signed certificate. 6 months. You live in my house. You attend my dinners. You smile at my associates. You play the devoted wife. In exchange, your father's debt is zeroed out today." He gestured loosely toward the folder on the table. "I'll also place $1 million into a blind trust in your name, accessible the day the divorce papers are filed. you walk away clean. Your father walks away breathing. And if I say no, Dominic didn't blink. Then I collect my 2.4 million in flesh, and you can pick up his teeth from the carpet. It wasn't a threat. It was a business model. Tessa looked at her father. He was a pathetic, broken man who had stolen her college fund, pawned her mother's jewelry, and lied to her face for 2 decades. But he was her father. She reached forward and opened the folder. The contract was thick, filled with dense legalese. It detailed public appearances, living arrangements, non-disclosure clauses. It was a purchase order. She was the product. "Do you have a pen?" she asked. Dominic reached inside his jacket and pulled out a heavy silver Mont Blanc. He held it out. As she took it, her fingers brushed his. His skin was unnervingly warm. Tessa flipped to the last page. She didn't read the fine print. The fine print didn't matter when there was a gun to your head. She signed her name in quick, jagged strokes. Tessa Sullivan. She pushed the folder back across the glass. Dominic picked it up. He looked at the signature, then at her. "Pack a bag. My driver will pick you up at 8 tonight. What about him?" Tessa pointed a trembling finger at her father. "He goes to a rehab facility in Maine, handpicked by me. He stays there for the duration of our arrangement. If he leaves, the deal is void." Dominic slipped the pen back into his pocket. "Welcome to the family, Tessa." They were married on a Tuesday. It rained. City Hall was crowded with couples, vibrating with nervous joy. Tessa stood beside Dominic in a plain grey sheath dress she'd bought off the rack at a department store. Dominic wore a black suit that cost more than her car. The judge mumbled through the vows. They didn't hold hands. When the judge told them to exchange rings, Dominic produced a platinum band encrusted with a terrifying amount of diamonds. He slid it onto her finger. It was cold and heavy when the judge said, "You may kiss the bride." Dominic leaned in. Tessa stiffened, holding her breath. He didn't aim for her lips. He pressed his mouth to her cheek, his breath hot against her skin. He smelled of rain and sharp cologne. "Smile," he murmured against her jaw. "We're on camera." She looked past his shoulder. A man in a trench coat was snapping photos from the back row. Dominic's public relations team, ensuring the family man narrative reached the right inboxes by noon. Tessa forced the corners of her mouth up. It felt like her face would crack. The penthouse was a fortress in the sky. 3,000 square feet of stark white walls, black marble floors, and aggressive modern art. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a high-end waiting room. "Your bedroom is down the hall, second door on the left," Dominic told her as he dropped his keys on the foyer console. "Mine is the master at the end. Don't go in there. The kitchen is fully stocked. Maria comes on Tuesdays and Fridays to clean. You have a security detail. 2 men. They follow you when you leave the building." "I go to work at the hospital tomorrow at 6 a.m., Tessa said, slipping her sensible flats off her aching feet. "Will they follow me into the ER ward?" "They will wait in the lobby," Dominic said, shrugging off his suit jacket. "You don't take the subway anymore. A car will take you and bring you back." "I'm a prisoner." "You're an investment." Dominic poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. "I protect my investments." Yeah. The first 3 weeks were a study in cold avoidance. They lived like ghosts, haunting the same sprawling house. Tessa worked her 12-hour shifts at the hospital, patching up gunshot wounds and drug overdoses, surrounded by the chaos of real bleeding life. Then she came back to the sterile quiet of the penthouse. But the avoidance couldn't last. The contract demanded a performance. The first dinner party was a trial by fire. Dominic hosted 5 of his top capos and their wives. Tessa was given a black silk dress by a designer she couldn't pronounce and told to be charming but quiet. She stood by the marble kitchen island, holding a glass of club soda, watching the men smoke cigars on the terrace, while the wives clustered on the white leather sofas, discussing real estate and summer homes in the Hamptons. They looked at Tessa with thinly veiled suspicion. They knew she was a nobody. So Tessa, an older woman named Carmela, purred her neck heavy with gold. Dominic kept you a secret. Where did you two meet? Tessa took a slow sip of her water. A charity event, she lied smoothly. Dominic had fed her the cover story. I was volunteering. He was donating. How sweet. Carmela's smile was sharp. You don't seem like his usual type. And what is his usual type? Dominic's voice cut through the room. He stepped in from the terrace, bringing the smell of tobacco smoke with him. He walked straight to Tessa, sliding a heavy, warm hand around the bare skin of her waist. He pulled her flush against his side. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity up her spine. She had to fight the instinct to flinch. His usual type, Dominic continued, looking dead at Carmela, is none of your business. But I can assure you my wife is exactly what I want. He looked down at Tessa. The expression on his face was startling. The dead pavement eyes were entirely alive, crinkling at the corners with what looked terrifyingly like genuine affection. He reached up and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Isn't that right, mia cara?" he murmured. "Yes," Tessa managed to choke out. For the rest of the night, he didn't let her go. He kept his hand on her lower back. He laughed at her quiet, dry jokes. He filled her water glass before she even realized it was empty. It was a flawless performance. It terrified her. Hours later, after the last guest had left, and the heavy mahogany door locked behind them, the silence rushed back into the penthouse. Tessa kicked off her heels and retreated to the kitchen. She needed space. She braced her hands against the cool marble counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Footsteps padded softly behind her. Dominic had shed his jacket and tie. He rolled up his sleeves, exposing thick, corded forearms covered in fading ink. "You did well tonight," he said. The warmth from the party was gone. The boss was back. "I earned my keep," Tessa shot back. Her adrenaline was still spiking from the forced intimacy. "You're a good actor, Dominic. They bought every second of it." Dominic opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap but didn't drink. He leaned against the opposite counter, watching her in the dim light of the range hood. "I don't like people disrespecting what belongs to me," he said quietly. "I don't belong to you. You rented me." Semantics. "Reality," Tessa snapped. She crossed her arms defensively. "Don't touch me like that again, unless there's an audience." Dominic's eyes darkened. He set the water bottle down with a slow, deliberate motion. He crossed the kitchen until he was standing directly in front of her. He was too big for the space. He boxed her in. "You think this is easy for me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Having you in my house, watching you walk around in my space, knowing you look at me like I'm a monster." "You are a monster," Tessa whispered, though her breath hitched. "Maybe." He leaned in closer. "But I'm the monster keeping you safe right now. And out there in front of them, you are mine. If I need to touch you to sell it, I will touch you." He didn't move away. He stayed there breathing the same air, close enough that she could see the faint pulse beating at the base of his throat. For a split second, his gaze dropped to her lips. Then he stepped back, turning his back on her. "Go to bed, Tessa. We have a gala on Friday. Get your rest." By month 4, the Cold War in the penthouse had thawed into a fragile domestic truce. They learned the topography of each other's habits. Tessa knew Dominic drank his coffee black and read the physical newspaper at 6:30 every morning. Dominic knew Tessa couldn't sleep after a bad shift at the hospital and would sit on the terrace in the freezing wind until her hands were numb. They stopped treating the apartment like a battlefield. They started treating it like a lifeboat. It happened on a Tuesday in late November. The first real snow of the year was falling over Chicago, burying the city in suffocating white. Tessa was off duty. She was curled on the living room sofa, a medical journal resting on her lap, the television playing on mute. The front door opened. It didn't click shut with its usual smooth precision. It slammed. Tessa dropped her journal. She stood up just as Dominic stumbled into the foyer. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was soaked down the left side. The stain was dark, heavy, and unmistakably red. He leaned heavily against the console table, his breath coming in sharp, wet hitches. A man named Leo, one of Dominic's most trusted lieutenants, hovered behind him, his hands hovering uselessly. "I told you to go to the private clinic, boss," Leo was saying, his voice tight with panic. "No hospitals," Dominic grated out. He coughed, and a thin line of blood trickled down his chin. "No clinics. The commission is watching. If they smell blood in the water, it's a war." Tessa was moving before she made a conscious decision to act. The ER nurse overrode the captive wife. She crossed the room in seconds, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. "Leo helped me get him to the kitchen island," she ordered. Her voice was flat, authoritative. It brooked no argument. Leo blinked, startled by the sudden command, but he grabbed Dominic's right arm. Together they hauled him into the kitchen. Dominic groaned as they hoisted him onto the cold marble counter. His head rolled back against the cabinets. His skin was the color of dirty ash. "Get my medical bag from the hall closet." "Top shelf," Tessa snapped at Leo. As the man scrambled to obey, Tessa grabbed a pair of trauma shears from a kitchen drawer. She stepped between Dominic's knees and grabbed the hem of his ruined shirt. She cut upward, slicing through the expensive cotton with brutal efficiency. She peeled the fabric back. The wound was on his left flank, just below the ribs. A clean, deep slice. A knife, not a bullet. "You're lucky," she said, her voice entirely devoid of panic. She pressed a thick wad of paper towels hard against the gash. "It missed the spleen. But you're going to need stitches. A lot of them." Dominic looked down at her. His eyes were hazy with pain, but they locked onto her face. "Do it." Leo returned with the black bag. Tessa took it, waving him off. "Boil water, lots of it. Then get out of the kitchen." For the next hour, the penthouse transformed into an operating room. Tessa worked with ruthless precision. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady, completely unfazed by the gore. She injected local anesthetic around the edges of the laceration. Dominic didn't flinch. He just watched her. "You do this every day," he murmured, his voice slurring slightly from the blood loss. "Usually with better lighting," she replied, threading the curved needle. "Hold still. This is going to pull." She began to suture. The kitchen was silent, except for the harsh rasp of his breathing and the soft snick of the needle-piercing skin. The artificial distance they usually kept between them was gone. She was standing, flush against his thighs. Her hands were covered in his blood. "Why didn't you let them take you to a clinic?" she asked quietly, tying off a knot. "Weakness," Dominic said. "If my men think I'm weak, they panic. If my rivals think I'm weak, they strike. I have to be untouchable." "Nobody is untouchable," Tessa said. She cut the thread. "You bleed red like the rest of the junkies and thugs I stitch up on Friday nights." "I know." He reached out, his hand heavy and smeared with drying blood wrapped loosely around her wrist. He didn't grip hard. It was an anchor, not a shackle. Tessa froze the needle suspended in her other hand. She looked up at him. The mask of the ruthless boss was entirely gone. Under the harsh kitchen lights, he just looked like a tired, battered man. The lines around his eyes were deep. The weight of his life was written all over his face. "Thank you," he said. The words were quiet, but they felt massive in the empty room. Tessa swallowed hard. She pulled her wrist gently from his grasp. "It's my job." "You're shaking," he observed. She looked down. Her hands, rock steady while she worked, were now trembling violently. The adrenaline was leaving her system, replaced by the terrifying realization of how close he had come to dying on her floor. "I'm fine," she lied. She stepped back, breaking the proximity. "Keep it clean. I'll check the stitches tomorrow. Change your shirt." She turned to the sink to wash the blood from her hands. The water ran pink, then clear. When she looked over her shoulder, Dominic was still sitting on the counter. He wasn't looking at his wound. He was looking at her. His dark eyes, entirely unreadable, calculating something new. For the first time since the day in his office, Tessa felt a genuine spike of fear. Not because he was dangerous, but because the look in his eyes felt dangerously real. 6 months. 182 days. Tessa stood in the center of her bedroom. A single battered black suitcase sat on the mattress. It contained a few pairs of scrubs, some jeans, and a handful of sweaters. She was leaving exactly as she had arrived. She left the designer dresses hanging in the closet. She left the expensive shoes in their boxes. The platinum wedding band sat perfectly centered on the glass nightstand. Her father had been released from the main facility yesterday. He was clean. The debt was erased. The $1 million was sitting in an offshore account in her name. The contract was fulfilled. The penthouse was silent. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Dominic was usually at his warehouse on Tuesdays. Tessa zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She gripped the handle, took a deep breath, and turned around. Dominic was standing in the doorway. He wore a dark suit, his tie loosened, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely still, too still, like a wire pulled to the breaking point. "You're packed," he said. It wasn't a question. "The 6 months are up," Tessa replied. She kept her voice steady. She gripped the suitcase handle tighter. "The money cleared this morning. My father is safe. I'm leaving." Dominic pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the suitcase, then at the empty nightstand where the ring sat, and finally at her face. "I spoke with the board at Chicago General," he said. "I bought a new wing for the pediatric ward, anonymous donation. The only stipulation is that you get promoted to head nurse. Any department you want, your own hours." Tessa stared at him. The air in her lungs turned to lead. "You did what? I also found a brownstone in Lincoln Park," he continued, his voice dropping into a low, urgent cadence. "It has a garden. You said once you missed having a garden. It's yours. We can move tomorrow." "Dominic, stop." He didn't stop. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a small, worn velvet box. It looked incredibly out of place in his massive, violent hands. He popped it open. Inside wasn't a gaudy diamond. It was a simple, delicate, vintage ring. An emerald cut, modest, elegant. A ring for a real wife. "I don't want you to leave," he said. His voice cracked just a fraction. It was the loudest sound she had ever heard him make. "The contract is done. This isn't a transaction. Stay with me, Tessa. Stay." He held the box out to her. His hand, the hand that commanded an empire of blood and shadow, was trembling. Tessa looked at the ring. Then she looked at the man offering it. She felt a profound, agonizing ache in her chest. Over the last 6 months, she had seen the man beneath the monster. She had seen him tired. She had seen him bleeding. She had seen him laugh quietly at her terrible hospital jokes, but she also saw the security detail at the door. She remembered the blood on his rug the day they met. "I can't," she whispered. Dominic froze. The desperate hope in his eyes shattered. "I can give you anything. Name it." "I want my life back," Tessa said. Her voice broke tears, finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "I want to wake up and not wonder if you're going to come home with a bullet in your chest. I want to walk down the street without 2 armed guards behind me. You bought me Dominic. You bought my life to save my father's. But you cannot buy me twice and call it love. I love you," he said. The words tore out of his throat, raw and unpracticed. It sounded like it physically hurt him to say it. "You love the peace I bring to this cage," she corrected gently. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his, closing the velvet box. "But it's still a cage, and I am suffocating." Dominic stared at her hand on his. He took a ragged, shaking breath. The stoic, untouchable boss of the Chicago syndicate crumbled. Tears, hot, silent, and devastating, welled in his dark eyes and spilled over his lashes. They tracked down the harsh angles of his face. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't try to hide his face. He stood completely exposed, completely broken by the one thing his money and power couldn't secure. He didn't grab her. He didn't threaten her. He just wept, a silent, agonizing surrender. "I'm sorry," Tessa choked out. She picked up her suitcase. She walked past him. He didn't turn around. He didn't reach for her. He stayed in the center of the room, staring at the closed velvet box in his hand. Tessa walked down the long hallway, out the heavy mahogany door, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off her view of the penthouse forever. She was free. She leaned her head against the cold metal of the elevator wall and finally, quietly let herself break. Did Tessa make the right choice, leaving Dominic behind? Or should she have stayed and fought for the man beneath the monster? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this gritty, emotional Mafia romance kept you hooked, hit that like button, share it with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, full-length audio stories. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a chapter. Thanks for listening.